On day 16, I woke up in a garage unfamiliar where I am, but then it hit me. I was still at the boss's mansion. This guy was loaded, all kinds of tractors, sprayers, giant silo, and a crop processing plant. Let's not forget of the 2 huge sheep and cow pastures. He wanted to make me an offer I can't refuse. You see, his son doesn't want to follow in his steps and become a farmer, so the boss is looking for somebody to help him out. I am the perfect victim because of the money me and Grandpa own him. You can even say we are the modern slaves. If I help him out, he will deduct 10k for every job I finish, so without hesitation, I agreed. I went back home and explained to Walter what happened and where I was. I skipped the part of my new employer and took a stroll around the farm. I noticed there were tons of products to deliver, so I jumped in the 3650 and started loading the trailer. I was getting pretty good at this. I drove to the Future Museum and unstrapped the beams. Then a second trip was made. This time I was carrying wooden boards. And finally, I had enough wool to be worth the trip to the spinnery. I must admit, this day started very bad. However, the profit from the deliveries put a smile on my face. Before I headed back home, I stopped briefly at Katie's to chat and get hay bales for the sheep. They will need food if I want them to survive the winter. I dropped the bales next to the sheep farm and backed up the tractor into the barn. I was just about to go and see my new boss when Grandpa told me to check the store first. In Farming Simulator 25 you can buy equipment with nice discount if you're lucky to have what you need on display, and I was in luck. A planter and spader were available. These new toys will be needed later. However, I had to get back to the big man as he needed me for my first task. When I arrived, he explained there was nobody to drive his harvesters. His son wasn't going to help at all. I agreed and went to see what I was about to work with. Lo and behold, the pinnacle of what you might say is the top of the top regarding farming equipment. The New Holland CR11 with a custom paint job and tires. This baby was running on its own. Even the biggest idiot could operate this beast. Maybe that's why I'm driving it. I drove to the cornfield and started filling the combine with fresh maize, knowing 10k will be off the depth. The next day, I remembered I had left the spader and tree planter at the shop. I started the Challenger and went to grab them. First was the planter and then the spader. The tree sower was for later. Right now I had to prepare our fields for planting. With the tool lowered, it ripped through the ground. Later that day, all the fields were done. I didn't have time to do anything else, so I rushed to the Lord of Bathrobes and got into action. This time I had to cultivate the cornfield I harvested yesterday. The cool part about working for rich farmers is all the toys you get to play with. I chose the John Deere 9RX with 490 horsepower engine. Nothing could stop this thing. The cultivator was unfolded and I worked on them fields until late. At day 18, you could smell winter in the air. I drove to see Noah and checked how he was doing. However, he was nowhere to be found. I stopped at Tom and Gary to collect my delivery list. This time they needed roof plates and the only place to get them was the warehouse. I wasn't going to make any profit from this delivery as I haven't paid Tom for the biogas. So we both agreed to deliver the roof plates at a discount in exchange for the biogas plant usage. After I unloaded the products and collected my money, I stopped at the shop to check the discount category. I was in luck again. A small animal trailer was available. Without hesitation, I purchased it. I also had to get a lime spreader. The animal trailer was going to be used for the sheep. The pen was full of animals, which wasn't bad at all. However, I will sell some of them to make space for offsprings. This way I will always have new animals that will keep producing wool. With the new lime spreader, I went to the local stone crusher and filled it with lime. I started covering all the fields before the snow, so the soil is protected during the harsh winter. I left the spreader back at the shop, ignoring the logistics manager, and collected our new sheep transport. I tried backing it up without hitting the roof, but I failed. On the second try, the trailer was filled with 13 sheep and I drove off to Katie. There, the sheep were sold for $7,150. I wanted to say hi to her, but she had already went home. Barley was next. I remembered about better prices, so now was the perfect time. At the end of the day, I was close to 100 grand again. The next day started with a bunch of cutted trees and my realization, this was about to be a huge problem. If I don't have trees, I can't supply the investors with lumber, but then it hit me, I already had the tree planter. I was just missing the saplings. Pine was what we were about to put in the ground. The 4 pallets were securely strapped and delivered at the spot, which I was going to turn into a small forest. I collected the wood planter next to the barn, loaded the 3 saplings pallets, and started the operation. In the end, I was happy of how the process turned out. This was actually looking like a forest. Now I just had to wait for the trees to grow. I headed back to the house and grabbed lunch, then hopped into the truck and drove to the biogas plant to see if the silage had fermented enough. The maize was ready to be turned to electricity, but I had no way of loading it into the mixer. Tom told me they are awaiting delivery of a wheel loader that should arrive tomorrow. I had no other option but to see if the boss man needed something done. This time, all of his animals needed feeding. I drove to the sheep with the telehandler and unloaded 1 hay bale. Next, I got to drive and feed his cows with delicious TMR power food. The very next day, I went to Tom to see if the wheel loader was here, and to my surprise, it had arrived. The catch was I had to collect it from the store. Gary wanted the machine serviced before it was put to use. The Volvo was trapped and I drove it all the way up to the giant facility. I was the first person to fill the bucket with anything. The cover was lifted and the golden brown produce started flowing towards the mixers. The total amount was 154,000 liters. I awaited for the process to finish and collected my pay, which was around 70k. I stopped to thank Tom and headed back home. There, more work was awaiting. All the lumber products had to be delivered to the renovating site. I was so confident this time that I loaded everything on the trailer and delivered the lumber with just 1 trip. By day 21, spring was back and with it our first job regarding my future crops. I filled the Challenger with diesel and drove to the shop to browse for a planter. I decided to get the Fernland as it wasn't that big but still big enough to save me time. I ordered 1 box of seeds and then remembered the tractor needed repair. In the shop I decided to upgrade the Challenger to the astonishing 225 horses. I even paid for a GPS to be installed. With my new upgraded machine, I attached the planter and filled it with seeds. I drove back to the farm and gently lowered the tool. I was also careful not to drive on top of the soil too much. Everything was hooked and I put the settings into the GPS. I was starting to look like a professional farmer. In the middle of the planting process, Grandpa Walter called me over. Some guy named David was calling all morning for me. He left 6 messages asking specifically for me. With confusion, I left the planting for later and went to see what this fellow wanted from me. And here he is. Meet David, an old classmate of Noah. He looked very happy to see me and how he grew up knowing Grandpa. He told me his life story, how he decided to leave the big city and to move back here where it was much more normal, as he put it. I tried to listen carefully, but in the end I made him cut to the chase. David gave me a contract and if I fulfill it, he will tell me the real reason why he called me over. I agreed to his terms without knowing what was about to happen. At the store was waiting something out of this world. The only sprayer of this kind was at the big man's farm. I was about to see what 42-meter wide sprayer feels like when driven on top of the crops. The strange thing was, David didn't mention he owns any land around here. I parked at the edge of the said field and unfolded the giant arms of the machine. This was going to be fun. In a blink of an eye, or 5 minutes, the job was done. I folded the sprayer, leaving it for somebody else to collect, and returned back to David. This time, the conversation went totally different. He was talking with a strange spark in his eyes. He explained he was into treasure hunting, and recently he found some maps suggesting there were tons of small treasures scattered around the town. He also told me he can't go and look for strange items as he had an accident recently and he was not able to move for too much. He even had a strange device next to him that would pinpoint the exact location of the collectibles. I grabbed the strange device from the box, said farewell and drove back to the farm. There I explained to Walter about David and he immediately remembered him. I wanted to continue the pleasant chat, but I knew the planting wasn't done. The new powerful Challenger engine was turned on and the Querneland planter lowered in the soil. We were back to business. After quite some time, all the fields in front of the farm were drilled. The big field will be planted later with corn. Very carefully, I packed the tool in the shed and went to see Noah. I told him about David and to my surprise, he said some good things about that guy. Before I went to the rich bathrobe rocking model, Katie and I had a pleasant chat. The next day, I was back at the rich man's farm and he had a big plan. This 1100 horsepower behemoth was what I was going to work with today. I backed up and connected to one of the planters from his garage. I managed to scrape it a bit, but as nobody was looking, I played the no see no tell card and drove off to the future cornfield. The big butt made this task look like child's play. The job was finished, but our planting adventure was just starting. As I mentioned earlier, I want to plant more corn. I was surprised of the income we made from the silage, so this time I'm expanding the operation. And just like that, the farm was full of sunflowers and corn. The awesome planter was dropped at the shop and returned. After that, I stopped to see Tom and Gary, and while chatting, something very strange happened. The museum was getting good progress, but we were missing what to put inside. Then Gary told me how when he was a kid, he heard stories about treasure hunters. In the last few iterations of Farming Simulator, you can find collectibles scattered around different parts of the maps, and they are actually worth a fortune. All of a sudden, I was filled with adrenaline and my wish to become Indiana Jones was all over the place. The map David gave me drove me to this silo complex. I pulled up the strange device that resembled a flashlight and it started emitting flashing light. It looked like the closer I was getting to a collectible, the more the light was flashing. To my surprise, the item I was looking for was the shovel. I grabbed it and with it came a nice bonus of 10 grand. Day 23 started with a bunch of forestry. I was so amazed of yesterday's finding that I completely lost track of time and made a bunch of planks and beams. To relax myself, I checked on the crops and saw the stems were healthy. However, I had problems with the weeds again. Good thing the trees were growing slow but steady. However, I didn't have time for that. Right now I was eager to get another map from David. I even tried to drive in front of the train and good thing I missed, otherwise this was going to be the end of the story. For the OGs out there who are still watching, type me in the comments. I talked about my yesterday's adventure with David for a while and in the end I persuaded him to give me another piece of the map. On it there were 10 more collectibles marked. The first collectible on the list was this flower wall. The second one was in this garage and it was a wooden frame. Under a water tower I found this wheelbarrow. A metal pipe was hidden on top of the floor of this barn. The fifth collectible was a metal grate shoved in a gardening shack. Next to the road a wooden bucket was found, which was strange. In the local bees gatherer my device was going crazy. In the end, a smoker was what I was looking for. Across David's house, I crouched to find a strange wooden mechanism, and up in the forest near the biogas plant, a strange red mechanism was hidden in this shack. In half a day's work, I had enough money to repay the mafia boss, and that's what I did. Grandpa Walter and I were free from his nasty hands once and for all. The big man tried to ask me how did I come up with the money, but I didn't say a word and just gunned it. With all the items collected from the map, I focused on my fight against the weeds and sprayed all the fields. The next day, I was full with enthusiasm. Debt-free, we were capable of doing whatever we want. So I decided to show how great my stacking skills were in front of Grandpa and loaded all the timber we need for the next stage of the museum. With everything needed being delivered, I was invited by the investors to take a look inside and see the progress. At the first glance, I didn't see anything inside until I started spotting the items I found yesterday. All of them were placed in specific spots. When I returned home, the mafia boss was back, but this time things were different. His look was more friendly and there were no guns around. He wanted to offer me a real job. As he mentioned before, he was really impressed of my work on Grandpa's farm and how such a man like me would fit perfectly next to him. His son has no intentions of helping him around, so he was on his own. He offered me the position of farm manager. I told him I would think about it and headed to see Katie. I wanted to give her flowers, but instead I found my old soccer ball in the garage. I grabbed it and surprised her with my kicking skills. She looked flattered and confused at the same time, so I would say my flirting skills were getting somewhere. We spent the rest of the day talking and hanging out. On day 25, my wish to become that grumpy whip-rocking adventurer was all over me. However, David had other plans. He heard about my success from the day before, so this time he wanted a piece of the pie. I had to negotiate with him, and in the end, we both agreed to pay him $15,000 for the next piece of the map. I accepted and began the second stage of my treasure adventure. This time, I went to the spinnery and found a typewriter in the garage behind the building. The next clue headed me to the paper mill, where the collectible was the front desk. Don't ask me how I pulled it out of the window. At the old ferry, which was now Willie's restaurant, a work table was what I was looking for. The next treasure was hidden right next to the train tracks in the shed. It was a strange metal wheel. The flickering device was pointing towards that dumpster, so I had to show my parkour skills and jump the fence. Somebody was about to throw away the most expensive rake in human history. Katie saw my strange behavior, so she waved me over. I tried my best to dodge her questions and instead told her about all the progress I had in the past few days. She explained now was the perfect time to expand the land we own. One of the farmers was selling his field, which was right across the farm. And even better, it was full of wheat, ready for harvest. Without hesitation, I bought the land and now was a proud owner of said wheat field. But I wasn't stopping there. I had plans for the old Macy. I shared with Grandpa that it was for the best to retire the old harvester and get something newer in its place. Walter hesitated at first, but he knew my drive for success would not stop me, so he agreed. I jumped in the seat, turned the beacons on, and started the harvester. With the header attached, I parked the old machine right next to the storage warehouse and admired it one last time. The logistics manager greeted me at the front, and I went inside to browse what was in stock. From the vast amount of options, I chose Case Axial Flow with the appropriate header, of course. This combine was perfect as it's bigger than the old Macy but not too big to maneuver with around our fields. Even decided to buy a new trailer. This combination was going to save us a ton of time. I had everything I needed, the combine, the header, and the new trailer. The feeling of getting into something new is not comparable. With both harvester and tractor at the ready, I put the field settings in the GPS and the harvester was started. The straw will be kept and baled at a later stage. The GPS makes this job even easier. In the blink of an eye, I had straight rows of straw and silo full of wheat. The total amount that I harvested was 56,000 liters that will be kept for when the time is right. The trailer was parked under the tree. I navigated next to the shed and uncoupled the header to show Grandpa our new machine. He was speechless while I was showing him around the case. Then I backed it up in the storage shed and turned the engine off. Everything was looking great. Or so I thought.